Blood. Real blood. That's what Bella Adams saw first when she pushed open the storage room door behind her mother's restaurant at 2:47 in the morning. Not her mother. Not the wreckage of overturned shelves or the shattered jars of spices painting the concrete floor in rust and gold. Just blood, dark against the gray floor, pooling beneath fingers that still held a wooden spoon like a weapon that had failed. Her mother, Ayanna Adams, wasn't moving, and the three men standing over her were laughing. Now, imagine you're 15 years old. You've just watched your mother, the woman who raised you alone, who worked 16-hour days to keep a restaurant alive in Lower Manhattan, who taught you that dignity matters more than safety, get beaten unconscious by men who claim they're collecting protection money for someone named Antonio Volkov. You have two choices: run to the police, who've ignored your neighborhood for years, who treat immigrant business owners like problems instead of people, who will take a report and do nothing while those men come back to finish what they started, or run toward the monster everyone whispers about, the Russian who controls 20 blocks of Lower Manhattan with silence and surgical violence, the man whose name makes grown criminals cross the street, the one person in this city who might actually have the power to stop this. Welcome back to Ken's Romance Stories. What I'm about to share with you is the story of Bella Adams, a 15-year-old girl who made an impossible choice that saved her mother's life and exposed a rot growing in the heart of organized crime. This is about the night a terrified daughter grabbed a Mafia boss by his shirt and demanded justice in a world where justice isn't supposed to exist. And it's about Antonio Volkov, a man so haunted by his mother's murder that he spent 10 years building rules designed to prevent exactly what happened to Bella's mom. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button because this story has twists that will absolutely wreck you. And I promise you, by the end, you'll understand why sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is exactly the one you need. Let's begin. Act 1. The Breaking Point. 48 hours before Bella would walk into Sergei's supper club and change everything, Ayanna Adams was trying to close her restaurant like she did every night, exhausted, hopeful, and completely unaware that men were watching from across the street. Ayanna's kitchen occupied a narrow storefront on Eldridge Street, squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop in a neighborhood where rent was just low enough for dreamers who couldn't afford to quit. The restaurant served Caribbean-American fusion, her grandmother's jerk chicken recipe meeting New York's relentless innovation, oxtail stew that made construction workers weep, plantains fried in techniques passed down through generations of women who'd survived worse than gentrification. Ayanna had opened the restaurant 3 years ago with money scraped together from 2 decades of working other people's kitchens, serving other people's recipes, making other people rich. At 42, she'd decided that surviving wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to build something. Leave something. Prove to her daughter that Black women could own, not just work. The restaurant was barely breaking even. Most months, Ayanna chose between paying herself or paying vendors. She always chose vendors, always kept her credit good, her relationship strong, her reputation solid. Because reputation was the only currency that mattered when you were building something from nothing in a city that would rather tear you down. She'd finished wiping down the last table when she heard the bell above the door. Too late for customers. She'd locked that door 20 minutes ago. 3 men walked in like they owned the place. Not the casual ownership of regulars, but the aggressive ownership of people who'd decided possession was theirs by right rather than invitation. The first man was tall, white, muscular in the way of someone who spent serious time in expensive gyms. Tattoos crawled up his neck. Not prison tattoos, but designer ink that cost thousands. He wore a leather jacket despite the summer heat and sunglasses despite the dim interior lighting. The second was shorter, stockier, Latino with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. His hands stayed in his pockets, but his shoulders carried the tension of someone ready to move fast. The third hung back by the door, young, maybe early 20s, nervous energy making him shift from foot to foot. He was the one Ayanna focused on, the weak link, the one who might still have a conscience buried under whatever brought him here. "We're closed," Ayanna said, her voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. Her hand moved toward the phone behind the counter. Casual but purposeful, the tall one smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "That's fine. We're not here for food." He pulled a piece of paper from his jacket and placed it on the counter between them with the deliberate precision of someone delivering a legal document. Ayanna picked it up. A bill, itemized, professional looking, completely illegitimate. "Protection services, 2,000 baht per month. Territory fee, 500 baht month. Business insurance, 800 baht month. Total due, 3,300. What is this? Ayana's voice had gone cold, flat, the tone she used when she was controlling fury that wanted to explode. Protection, the tall man said, his smile widening. This neighborhood isn't safe anymore. A lot of crime, break-ins, fires, things happen to businesses that don't have proper security. I have security. Ayana gestured to the camera above the door, the alarm system panel visible behind the counter. And I don't need whatever this is. The scarred man moved then, pulling his hands from his pockets to reveal brass knuckles on his right fist. Not a weapon designed to kill, just to hurt, to make points that would heal with permanent reminders. See, Mrs. Adams, it is Mrs. Adams, right? With the daughter who walks home from school every day at 3:15. The tall man's voice had lost its pretense of friendliness. You don't understand how this works. This isn't optional. Everyone in this territory pays. You know whose territory this is, right? Ayana's blood went cold. Whose? Antonio Volkov's. And Antonio doesn't like when people refuse his protection. Makes him look weak. Makes other business owners think they can say no, too. Can't have that. The name settled into the room like a physical presence. Everyone in Lower Manhattan knew that name. The Russian who'd taken over 6 years ago and run his organization with rules that seemed insane by criminal standards. No drugs near schools, no involving families, no civilian casualties, no violence against women except in self-defense. But this was exactly the kind of protection racket Volkov was famous for not running. Everyone knew he left struggling businesses alone, that his collections focused on wealthy establishments that could afford security. Something wasn't right. I don't have $3,000, Ayana said, stalling for time while her mind raced through options that all ended badly. And I've never heard of Antonio Volkov collecting from restaurants like mine. Well, now you have. The tall man leaned across the counter, invading her space with practiced aggression. And you've got 48 hours to come up with the first payment. After that, we start expressing our disappointment in ways that affect your ability to run this place. And if I go to the police, the scarred man laughed, harsh, without humor. Go ahead. Tell them Antonio Volkov's men are collecting from you. See how fast they come running to protect a black woman with a business license in a neighborhood they've already written off. You think they care? You think they'll protect you? He was right. Ayana knew he was right. She'd called the police 3 times in the past year. Once for a break-in, once for vandalism, once for harassment from a drunk who wouldn't leave. Each time they'd taken 45 minutes to arrive. Each time, they'd filed a report and done nothing. Each time, she'd been made to feel like she was the problem for expecting protection. 48 hours, Mrs. Adams. The tall man tapped the paper on the counter. And tell your daughter we said hello. Beautiful girl. Be a shame if anything happened to her walking home from school. They left. Ayana stood frozen for 5 minutes, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't pick up the phone. When she finally could move, she didn't call the police. She called her daughter. Bella, she said, when her daughter answered, trying to keep the fear out of her voice and failing. I need you to listen carefully. Starting tomorrow, I'm picking you up from school. You don't walk home alone. You don't talk to anyone I haven't introduced you to. And if anyone approaches you asking about me or the restaurant, you run. Do you understand? Mom, what's wrong? Just promise me, baby. Promise me you'll be careful. Bella promised. But promises don't stop bullets. Don't stop brass knuckles. Don't stop men who've decided they can take what they want because power is the only law that matters. Act 2. The first payment. 48 hours later, Ayana still didn't have $3,000. She'd spent those 2 days trying to scrape together money from every possible source, calling suppliers to delay payments, checking her emergency fund that barely existed, even considering taking out a loan she had no way to repay. Nothing worked. She was a single mother running a restaurant that barely broke even. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. At 2:30 a.m., after another 16-hour day, she was alone in the restaurant doing inventory in the storage room when she heard the front door open. She knew immediately it wasn't a customer, knew before she heard the heavy footsteps, before she heard the tall man's voice calling out, Mrs. Adams, time to discuss your payment plan. Ayana grabbed her phone, but the scarred man was faster, appearing in the storage room doorway before she could dial. He plucked the phone from her hand with almost casual violence and tossed it across the room where it shattered against the concrete wall. "That wasn't smart," he said, and his fist moved. The brass knuckles caught her across the cheekbone with force that snapped her head sideways and sent her crashing into the metal shelving. Jars of spices fell around her, turmeric and paprika and cumin creating a fog of gold and rust. She tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. The world had become underwater, slow and muffled and wrong. "Where's our money?" The tall man stood over her now, his face emotionless. This was business, just business. The fact that she was a mother, a business owner, a human being trying to survive, was irrelevant to whatever calculation he was making. "I don't have it." Her words came out slurred, blood filling her mouth from where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. "Please, I just need more time. I can get you 500 by next week." The kick caught her in the ribs, driving air from her lungs in an explosion that left her gasping. Something cracked. She could feel it, could feel her body breaking under their casual violence. Antonio doesn't negotiate with people who refuse his protection the first time. The tall man crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. "You made him look weak. Now we have to make an example, nothing personal." Another kick, another. She curled into herself, trying to protect vital organs, her hands coming up to shield her face, while they turned her body into a message written in bruises and broken bones. Through the haze of pain, she heard the young one, the nervous one who'd hung back by the door during their first visit. "Maybe that's enough, man. She's not moving anymore. She's breathing. That's enough for the message to work." They left her there, in the wreckage of her storage room, surrounded by the ruins of spices her grandmother had taught her to use. Left her bleeding on concrete, clutching a wooden spoon she'd grabbed at some point during the beating, a weapon that was never going to be enough against fists and brass knuckles and the kind of violence that came from men who'd learned to see people as problems instead of humans. Bella found her 3 hours later. She'd woken up at 2:47 a.m. with the certainty that something was wrong. Mother's intuition worked both directions, apparently. She'd thrown on clothes and run the 8 blocks from their apartment to the restaurant, her heart pounding harder with every step. The front door was unlocked. That was wrong. Mom always locked the door. Always. She'd pushed through the dining area, calling out, her voice echoing in the empty space. Found the storage room door ajar. Found blood on the floor. Found her mother. "Mom, Mom, Mom." Ayana was breathing. Barely. Her face was swollen almost beyond recognition. Blood had pooled beneath her from somewhere Bella couldn't immediately identify. Her hands were still clutched around that wooden spoon, fingers locked in rigor that had nothing to do with death and everything to do with holding on when letting go would mean the end. Bella called 911, held her mother's hand while sirens approached with agonizing slowness, rode in the ambulance while paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, their faces professionally neutral in the way of people who'd seen too much violence to be shocked anymore. At Mount Sinai Hospital, a nurse with kind eyes and exhausted edges gave Bella the diagnosis in words designed to be clinical, distant, protective: broken ribs, fractured cheekbone, concussion, internal bleeding that required surgery. "Your mother will live, but she'll carry these scars forever, visible and invisible." A police officer came to take a statement. Young, white, bored. He took notes with the kind of disinterest that told Bella everything she needed to know about how seriously this would be investigated. "Did your mother see who did this?" "She told me before. 2 days ago. Said men came demanding protection money. Said they worked for Antonio Volkov." The officer's pen stopped moving. His expression shifted from bored to something more complex. Concern mixed with, was that fear? "Antonio Volkov, are you sure?" "That's what they told her. Gave her a bill. Demanded $3,000. The officer closed his notebook. "Miss Adams, I'm going to be straight with you. If Antonio Volkov's organization is involved, this is beyond local police jurisdiction. These cases usually get referred to organized crime units, FBI, people with resources we don't have. So you're not going to do anything. I'm saying we'll file a report, but realistically, prosecuting organized crime requires witnesses willing to testify, evidence that doesn't mysteriously disappear, and budgets we don't have for neighborhoods that." He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "For neighborhoods that don't matter. For Black women who own restaurants in areas the city has already abandoned. For people like Bella and her mother who weren't supposed to expect protection, just survival." "Get out!" Bella's voice came cold, flat, the same tone her mother had used on the phone 2 days ago. File your report. Do nothing. That's what you're good at. The officer left, and Bella sat in the hospital waiting room while her mother underwent surgery to stop internal bleeding. Sat for 5 hours, watching the sun come up over a city that didn't care if people like her mother lived or died. Watched nurses and doctors move with purpose while she sat paralyzed by rage and helplessness. And then she remembered something her mother had said once, years ago, when a landlord had tried to evict them illegally. Sometimes, baby, the system won't protect you. Sometimes you have to find protection where you can, even if it scares you. Power is power. The question is whether you can make powerful people care. Antonio Volkov had power. Everyone knew he had power, and if his men had done this, he needed to know. Needed to understand that his protection, the reputation he'd built, the rules everyone said he enforced, was being weaponized against exactly the kind of people he was supposed to leave alone. Maybe he'd care, maybe he wouldn't. But sitting in this hospital doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. Bella stood up, asked a nurse for directions to Sergei's supper club, got a look that communicated concern and understanding and fear. Sweetheart, that's not a place for... I know what it is. Bella's voice cut through the warning. That's why I'm going. She walked out of the hospital into morning light that felt too bright for how dark everything had become, walked 15 blocks through a city waking up, past coffee shops and convenience stores and people starting their days with no idea that some children were about to walk into criminal headquarters and gamble their lives on the possibility that monsters could have consciences. Act 3, the confrontation. Sergei's supper club didn't look like a criminal headquarters. It looked like exactly what it claimed to be, a Russian restaurant serving borscht and pelmeni to a neighborhood that included enough Eastern European immigrants to make the food authentic and the atmosphere comfortable. But everyone in Lower Manhattan knew what it really was. The back room where Antonio Volkov held court. The place where deals were made and broken, where people who'd crossed him came to apologize before disappearing. Where his organization's entire operation was coordinated with the precision of a Fortune 500 company and the ruthlessness of something much older than American law. Bella pushed through the door at 11:47 a.m. between the breakfast and lunch rushes when the dining room was nearly empty. A hostess approached with professional warmth that died when she saw Bella's face, 15 years old, black, clearly not here for pierogies. We don't open for lunch until noon, sweetheart. I'm not here for lunch. Bella's voice came steadier than she felt. I need to see Antonio Volkov. The hostess's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something that might have been respect for sheer audacity. Do you have an appointment? Tell him a girl whose mother was beaten by his men needs to talk. Tell him if he doesn't see me, I'm going to stand outside this restaurant and tell every person who walks by that Antonio Volkov protects rapists and murderers but can't protect a black woman trying to run a restaurant. The threat was empty. Bella knew it was empty, but she delivered it with enough conviction that the hostess hesitated, weighing the cost of turning her away against the cost of whatever chaos she might create. Wait here. The hostess disappeared through a door marked private in English and Cyrillic. Bella stood in the entrance, her hands shaking with adrenaline and terror and fury that had been building for 48 hours. She'd walked 15 blocks to get here. She wasn't leaving without answers. 3 minutes later, the door opened again. A massive man emerged, 6'5", built like he bench-pressed trucks, with a face that suggested Slavic ancestry and enough scar tissue to prove he'd survived things that killed other people. Come, he said in accented English, gesturing toward the private door. Bella followed him through a short hallway and into a room that looked nothing like she'd expected. No weapons on the walls, no tough guys in leather jackets, no atmosphere of casual violence, just a private dining room with elegant table settings, exposed brick walls, soft lighting, and a man sitting alone at a corner table with his back to the wall and clear sightlines to both entrances. Antonio Volkov. He was younger than she'd imagined, maybe 30, though his eyes looked older. Tall, lean, with sharp Slavic features and dark hair pushed back from a face that could have been handsome if it wasn't so carefully neutral. He wore a simple black sweater and dark jeans, expensive but understated. No jewelry, no obvious weapons, just stillness that radiated control. Ice blue eyes lifted from the tablet he'd been reading and locked onto Bella with the kind of focused attention that made her understand why people were terrified of him. Not because he looked violent, because he looked like he saw everything, calculated everything, and had already made decisions about her before she'd even spoken. You're the girl whose mother was beaten. His voice was quiet, accented, stating fact rather than asking questions. Yes. Bella moved forward without permission, crossing the space between the door and his table with determination that overrode survival instincts, screaming at her to run. She stopped at his table, her hands gripping the edge to keep from shaking. Then she reached out and grabbed the fabric of his black sweater, twisting expensive material in her fist just above his heart. The massive man who'd brought her moved instantly, his hand going to a weapon Bella couldn't see but knew existed. Antonio raised one finger, barely a movement, and the man froze. Bella held on to his sweater with both hands now, looking down at him with fury and desperation and grief that had nowhere else to go. "Your men beat my mother," she said, her voice cracking on the word mother. "She owns a restaurant on Eldridge Street. Ayanna's Kitchen. 3 men came demanding protection money. $3,000 a month. She didn't have it, so they came back and beat her so badly she's in surgery right now. They said they worked for you. They used your name." Antonio's expression didn't change. But something shifted behind those ice blue eyes, calculation happening at speeds Bella couldn't comprehend. "When?" The single word came quiet, almost gentle. "2 nights ago, they came demanding money. This morning, they came back when she couldn't pay. 3 hours ago, I found her bleeding on the floor of her storage room." Antonio gestured to the massive man. "Alexei, contact the hospital. Find out which one. Get me her condition, her room number, and the names of every staff member treating her. Then pull surveillance from every camera within 3 blocks of Eldridge Street for the last 72 hours. I want faces, license plates, anything." Alexei nodded and disappeared through a side door. Antonio looked back at Bella, his gaze still locked onto hers with that unsettling intensity. "3 men. Describe them." Bella did. Every detail her mother had told her. The tall white man with neck tattoos, the scarred Latino with brass knuckles, the nervous young one by the door. Each description came precise and clear, burned into her memory by rage that wouldn't let her forget. When she finished, Antonio's jaw tightened. The only visible sign of reaction. "They don't work for me." "They said they did. They used your name." "I know." His voice had dropped lower, colder. "That's how I know they don't work for me. Because no one in my organization collects from struggling restaurants, and no one uses my name without explicit authorization. Whoever these men are, they're counterfeiting my authority." Bella's grip on his sweater loosened slightly. "So what? You're going to tell me this isn't your problem? That I should go to the police who won't do anything? That I should just accept that my mother almost died because someone decided to use your name?" Antonio reached up slowly, carefully, and placed his hand over hers where she still gripped his sweater. His skin was warm. The gesture was strange, not threatening, not comforting, just contact, acknowledgement. "I'm telling you that whoever did this made it my problem the moment they used my name." He spoke with quiet certainty that felt like a promise or a threat or possibly both. "And I'm telling you that your mother will have protection starting immediately. Alexei will position men at the hospital and at your apartment. No one touches either of you again." "Why?" Bella's voice came small now, the fury draining out of her and leaving only exhaustion and fear. "Why do you care? Everyone says you're a criminal, a murderer. Why would you protect us?" Antonio was quiet for a long moment, his ice blue eyes distant. "Because 10 years ago, I watched my mother bleed out on a kitchen floor while men who claimed authority stood over her. Because I built this organization with rules specifically designed to prevent what happened to yours, and because those rules only matter if I enforce them when they're broken." He stood slowly, careful not to dislodge her grip, bringing himself to his full height. 6'2", lean but clearly strong, with the controlled movement of someone trained to violence. "You're brave," he said quietly. "Or foolish, probably both. Walking in here, grabbing me, demanding I care about something I might not have cared about. That takes courage most adults don't possess." "I didn't have a choice." Bella finally released his sweater. Stepping back. "The police won't help. My mother's in surgery. I'm 15 years old and the only person who can protect her. What was I supposed to do?" "Exactly what you did." Antonio's slight smile held no warmth, but something that might have been respect. "Alexei will take you back to the hospital. Stay with your mother. Don't leave her alone. And don't speak to any police officers without my lawyer present. Understand?" Bella nodded, too exhausted to argue or question or do anything except accept that this dangerous man had somehow become her best option for protection. "One more thing," Antonio said as she turned to leave. "The men who did this, when we find them, and we will find them, you don't need to know what happens next. Some things are better left to people who understand consequences. Can you accept that? Bella met his eyes, saw in them something cold and certain and completely inhuman in its calculation, understood that he was asking permission to do something terrible in her mother's name. I just want my mom to be safe. She will be, that I promise you. Act 4, The Investigation. Antonio's resources moved with the efficiency of a military operation. Within 3 hours, he had surveillance footage from 14 cameras in a 3-block radius of Ayana's restaurant, hospital records showing Ayana's condition, stable after surgery, severe trauma but expected to recover, background on every protection racket operating in Lower Manhattan, a list of 3 suspects who'd been running unauthorized collections using his name. The tall man with neck tattoos was Marcus Webb, former enforcer for a New Jersey crew, kicked out for excessive violence even by their standards. The scarred Latino was Javier Ruiz, 5 arrests for assault, 2 convictions, currently on parole. The nervous young one was Tyler Chen, 22, no record, but deep in debt to gambling operations. They'd been operating for 6 weeks, hitting 23 businesses, collecting over $40,000, using Antonio's name and reputation. Small-time grifters who'd gotten smart enough to be dangerous and stupid enough to think they could counterfeit authority without consequences. Antonio sat in his office reviewing the surveillance footage, watching Marcus Webb and his crew approach Ayana's restaurant 2 nights ago. Watched them deliver their threat. Watched Ayana's face shift from confusion to fear to controlled fury that reminded him painfully of his mother. Watched them return 48 hours later. Watched them enter. Watched them leave 20 minutes later. Marcus Webb wiping blood off his brass knuckles with casual indifference. Alexei entered without knocking. We found them. Webb rented a warehouse in Red Hook. All 3 are there now. They're counting money. Antonio closed the laptop. How many innocents in the area? It's industrial, after hours, empty. Good. Antonio stood, pulling on his jacket with economical movements. Full team. I want this clean and final. No witnesses, no evidence, no questions. They terrorized 23 families. They beat a woman half to death. They used my name to do it. I want this to be a message that echoes. What kind of message? The kind that reminds Lower Manhattan why my rules exist, and what happens to people who break them. The warehouse in Red Hook smelled of rust and motor oil and the East River's particular brand of industrial decay. Marcus Webb sat at a folding table counting cash, $40,000 in small bills, the earnings from 6 weeks of terror. Javier cleaned his brass knuckles with methodical care, polishing away dried blood. Tyler paced nervously, his energy suggesting he wanted to be anywhere else. I still think we should have killed her, Javier said, not looking up from his work. Dead women don't identify you to police? We're not killers, Marcus replied, though his tone suggested he was open to revision. We're collectors, and dead business owners don't pay monthly. This way, she's an example. Everyone else pays on time because they saw what happens when you don't. What about the daughter? She saw our faces when we left. She's 15. What's she going to do? The answer came in the form of the warehouse door exploding inward with force that sent metal screeching across concrete. 10 men poured through the opening, armed, masked, moving with military precision that spoke of training far beyond street thugs. Antonio entered last, unhurried, his ice-blue eyes taking in the scene with cold assessment. He gestured, and his men moved with practiced efficiency, disarming the 3 men, forcing them to their knees, creating a semicircle of weapons aimed at heads. Marcus Webb's eyes went wide with recognition and understanding and terror that came too late to matter. Volkov, listen, man, we can explain. You used my name. Antonio's voice cut through the attempted explanation like a blade through silk. You collected money by claiming I authorized it. You beat a woman half to death and told her I demanded it. You made 23 families terrified of protection that should have made them safer. We were just trying to make money. Thought your territory was big enough to share. You thought wrong. Antonio crouched in front of Marcus, bringing himself to eye level. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me the name of everyone who helped you, everyone who knew, everyone who stayed quiet when they should have spoken. You're going to give me addresses, phone numbers, bank accounts, everything. And if we do, then your deaths will be quick instead of educational. Marcus's face went gray. You're going to kill us either way? Yes. Antonio's tone suggested he was discussing weather patterns, not executions. Because you beat a mother in front of her daughter's eyes, metaphorically, Because you terrorized 23 families. Because you counterfeited the one thing that matters more than money in my world: authority. The only question is whether you die knowing you minimized collateral damage or whether I have to find everyone connected to you the hard way. Javier spat blood. We're not snitching. You will. Antonio stood. Because Alexei is very good at convincing people that cooperation is preferable to the alternative. He walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Make it hurt, he said, without looking back. But make it productive. I want every name by morning. Act 5. The Reckoning. Bella sat in her mother's hospital room watching machines track heartbeat and breathing and blood oxygen levels that translated life into numbers. Ayanna was awake now, her face swollen almost beyond recognition, but her eyes clear and focused on her daughter. You shouldn't have gone to him. Ayanna's words came thick, slurred by painkillers and facial trauma. That man is dangerous, baby. He's not a hero. I know he's not a hero. Bella held her mother's hand carefully, avoiding the IV line. But the police weren't going to help. And those men were going to come back. What was I supposed to do? Before Ayanna could answer, the door opened. Antonio entered with the same controlled precision he brought to everything, his presence immediately changing the room's atmosphere. He was followed by a woman in an elegant business suit carrying a leather folder. Mrs. Adams. Antonio nodded respectfully, maintaining distance. I'm Antonio Volkov. Your daughter came to see me this morning. I wanted to update you personally on the situation. Ayanna's eyes, the one that could still fully open, fixed on him with wariness and exhausted pragmatism. Am I supposed to thank you? For cleaning up a mess that happened because people used your name? No. Antonio's response came immediately, honestly. You're supposed to hear that the 3 men who hurt you are dead, that everyone connected to them is being handled, that your hospital bills are covered, your restaurant's repairs are covered, and you won't pay protection money to anyone. Not them, not me, not anyone. Your business is off limits. The woman in the suit stepped forward. I'm Rebecca Stein, attorney. I've prepared paperwork documenting that your medical expenses are being handled by a community fund. Nothing connects you to Mr. Volkov. Nothing requires your testimony or puts you in legal jeopardy. You're free to simply heal. Ayanna absorbed this information with the carefully controlled expression of someone who'd learned to navigate dangerous situations. And what do you want in return? Nothing. Antonio's ice blue eyes held steady. Your daughter had the courage to walk into my headquarters and demand I care about something I might not have cared about. She made me look at a failure in my own system. That deserves acknowledgement, not exploitation. You killed 3 people. Yes. The simple admission hung in the air. No justification, no explanation, just fact. And you think that makes you what? Better than them? A protector? No. Antonio's voice dropped lower. It makes me someone who enforces rules that prevent what happened to you from becoming normal. I'm not asking you to approve. I'm informing you that it's handled and you're safe. Bella watched the exchange, seeing 2 adults navigate territory that had no map. Her mother, exhausted and broken and still maintaining dignity. This criminal, dangerous and cold and somehow genuine in his limited way. Get out, Ayanna said finally. Take your money, take your protection. I don't want any of it. I'll heal, I'll rebuild, and I'll do it without owing anything to someone whose business is violence. Antonio nodded slowly. The protection stays regardless. You don't have to accept it or acknowledge it. But no one touches you or your daughter again. That's not negotiable. He turned to leave, then paused. Your daughter is remarkable, Mrs. Adams. Whatever you're teaching her about courage and standing up for what's right, don't stop. The world needs more people like her. He left before Ayanna could respond, Rebecca following with paperwork that would somehow make medical bills disappear without creating questions. Mother and daughter sat in silence for a long moment. Did I do the right thing? Bella asked finally, her voice small and uncertain. Ayanna squeezed her hand with what little strength she had. You did the only thing you could. Sometimes there are no right choices, baby, just choices. And you chose to fight for me instead of accepting what happened. That takes courage, even if it scares me how much courage you had to have. Epilogue. 6 months later. Ayanna's kitchen reopened on a Tuesday in February, 6 months after the attack. The restaurant had been renovated. New storage room, updated security, fresh paint throughout. The money had come from a community business recovery fund that no one could quite trace back to any specific source. Ayanna walked with a slight limp now, and her smile pulled unevenly from scar tissue that plastic surgery could only do so much to hide. But she was alive. The restaurant was thriving. And every night when she locked the door, she did it without fear. Bella noticed the men, though, the ones who appeared too frequently to be coincidence. Different faces, but same purpose. Watching the restaurant, watching their apartment, maintaining presence that never intruded, but never disappeared. Protection she hadn't asked for, couldn't refuse, didn't entirely want to refuse, if she was being honest with herself. She saw Antonio one more time, 3 months after the hospital. He was walking past the restaurant at night, just walking, like a normal person, though nothing about him suggested normal. Their eyes met through the window. He nodded once, simple acknowledgement. She nodded back, and that was it. The entire relationship between the girl who'd grabbed a mafia boss's shirt and the man who'd responded by killing 3 people and establishing protection that couldn't be rejected. Sometimes Bella wondered if she'd made a devil's bargain, if accepting protection from someone whose business was violence made her complicit in that violence, if safety purchased with blood was really safety at all. But then she'd watch her mother laugh with customers, see the restaurant filling up, notice the way other business owners on the block walked with less fear, and she'd understand something complicated. The world wasn't divided into heroes and villains. It was full of people making impossible choices in systems that failed them. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the dangerous person was the one who actually protected you when everyone else looked away. Antonio Volkov wasn't a hero. Bella knew that, would always know that. But on a night when her mother was bleeding and the police wouldn't come and the system had abandoned them, he'd been something more important than a hero. He'd been there. And that, Bella was learning, was sometimes all you could ask for. Closing. Thank you for following Bella and Ayanna's story. If this moved you, if you've ever had to make an impossible choice between bad options, if you've ever felt abandoned by systems that claim to protect you, if you understand that courage sometimes means walking toward danger because it's the only option left, then write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know where in the world this story resonated. Hit subscribe because these stories matter. They show us the complicated truth about protection, power, and the choices we make when we're desperate. They remind us that the world isn't simple, and neither are the people in it. Share this video, because somewhere, someone needs to know that sometimes survival means making choices that don't fit in neat, moral categories. That courage looks like a 15-year-old girl grabbing a mafia boss's shirt and demanding justice. That mothers are worth fighting for, even when the fight leads you to dangerous places. Until next time, remember, the world won't always protect you the way it should. But that doesn't mean you stop fighting. It just means you fight smarter, and sometimes, fighting smarter means knowing when to ask for help from unexpected places. See you in the next story.